Zoe got the divorce papers on Monday morning. She was in the middle of doing the laundry when the bell rang and she was served the divorce papers. She sat in the pristine kitchen, staring at the documents, confused. If the papers weren't directly addressed to her, she would have believed it was a case of mistaken identity. Or perhaps this was a prank and a TV production crew would jump out from the hedges. However, this was her reality, a confusing reality. Bruce, her husband of 15 years, was divorcing her. Just this morning, she had set out his clothes for work, made breakfast for him, and carried his bag to the car, waving him goodbye before returning to the house to start the house chores. Her friend Nancy hurried over and she burst into tears, shoving the papers at her. This has got to be a joke, right? Otherwise, why on earth would her husband divorce her? It just didn't make sense. Have there been any problems? Have you guys been fighting? Nancy asked. They had never raised their voices against each other in all the years they were married. Sure, their marriage was not the same as it had been when they married. There was some distance between them, and they were not as intimate as they used to be. Still, a divorce? Just last week, she suggested they go on a vacation, and he gave her the go-ahead to find exotic places. Have you spoken to him? Nancy asked. His secretary says he's busy every time I call, Zoe said. All day, Zoe was not herself. She was in a blank state, staring at the walls, over and over. She tried to think about what had gone wrong in their marriage. She was a good and obedient wife. She stayed home, tendering to the house, while Bruce provided for the family. Bruce came home late. She was asleep, but she hurried out of bed. What's going on, Bruce? She asked, waving the papers. She stared at him, hoping he would apologize and tell her it was a mistake. It is what it is. I want a divorce, he said, reaching for a bottle of scotch. She shook her head in disbelief. No. You can't do this, Bruce. Please. What have I done wrong? Please tell me. I will change. I will. You have done nothing wrong. It's just, I'm tired, Zoe. I need more from a wife, Bruce said. She stared at him, confused. What did he mean? I need a wife who's not as boring as you are. A wife who goes out there to work. A good-looking wife. A wife I can show to the world. She staggered at his words. You told me to quit my job. 10 years ago, she quit her job as a lawyer to be his wife. It had been a great sacrifice, but Bruce convinced her that being a traditional wife was suitable for their marriage. Well, I changed my mind, Bruce said. I will get a job. I know I've been out of work, but I don't want to be married to you anymore. I'm sorry, Zoe, but that is it. You have to admit it. This marriage is headed for the storms. We are no longer compatible. Zoe screamed, a scream filled with the pain that overwhelmed her, and then she broke down right on the floor, her heart ripped into two. The next few weeks were tough for Zoe. Bruce moved out of the house, advising her to get a lawyer. Every attempt by her to reach out to him for recognition was abortive. Their mutual friends she called to intervene had nothing to say but extended their pity to her. You need to get a lawyer fast, as she read through the latest summons delivered by Bruce's lawyers, Nancy said. She had gone through them and couldn't believe it. Since they had no children, he was leaving her with nothing. He was even taking the house from her. How was she supposed to survive? I understand that you still love him and want to settle this amicably, but Zoe, he's doing you dirty. After 15 years of being with him, he's offering you nothing? You deserve more than this, Nancy said. Zoe stared away, absently. She didn't even know what day it was. She barely ate and moped around the house, trying to come to terms with her reality. It still felt like a cruel joke, and a part of her hoped that Bruce would return home with an apology. Zoe, I'm worried about you, Nancy said with concern. Zoe didn't get a lawyer. She missed out on the meetings with Bruce and his lawyers. The blinds were drawn closed as she sat indoors in the house, wrapped in the overbearing pain that enveloped her. 15 good years she had dedicated herself to her marriage with Bruce. Court summons came in the following week. She would be held in contempt of the court if she didn't appear at the next hearing date. She would not only lose her marriage, she could also go to jail. Mr. Bruce is not here, the secretary said when Zoe showed up the following day at his office. Where did he go? Zoe asked. Bruce was a hard worker and spent most of his time at the office when he was not home. He worked at a renowned real estate firm in the city, and his clientele comprised politicians, prosperous businessmen, and women. I cannot disclose that to you, the secretary said. But I am his wife, Zoe defended. The woman had always been polite, but treated her coldly with what was happening. Have a lovely day, ma'am, the secretary said. Ma'am, you cannot go in there. Ma'am? Zoe hurried past the reception. She refused to believe the woman. Having spotted Bruce's car at the front, she was headed straight to his office when she heard voices of excitement in the conference room. There was a little gathering, with Bruce the center of attraction. Everyone had filled wine glasses in their hands. Bruce? She called out in a tiny voice. Bruce was surprised to see her there, and so were his colleagues, who had, over the years, become her friends. She had invited them to her home for dinner in the past years. Zoe, what are you doing here? Bruce asked as he pulled away from a blonde woman. Charity was her name, as she had been a guest at their home. Her eyes rested on Charity's pregnancy bump. What's going on here? Zoe asked. You are not supposed to be here, Bruce said. What's going on here? Her voice raised. We were going to tell you eventually, Charity said, placing her hand over her bump. Bruce and I are having a baby. For the next few seconds, she heard nothing. Not the honks of the car below in the streets, not the clacking of keyboards coming from the next room. Not even her heart was beating. A tear slid down her eyes as she stared at the man she loved with all of her heart. You said you didn't want children. You... After a year of marriage, she had suggested they start trying to have kids, and Bruce had sat her down and told her he didn't want children. He told her children were very dedicated and would rather they enjoy their lives without the extra baggage. It was a tough pill to swallow. She had always wanted to be a mother. While dating, she would tell him she wanted 3 children, and he would smile. He had told her she could leave if she wished to be different, but how could she have left him? They had a scare a year later, and he held her hand while the doctors tied her fallopian tubes. How could he be so cruel? I'm sorry, Zoe, but it just happened. She wants to keep the child. And you? What do you want? Zoe asked as tears streamed down her face. I want to be a father, Bruce said. Zoe yelled, flinging herself at him in rage. How could he have done this to her? She was pulled back by one of his colleagues, whom she lashed at. They had all known what was happening, but had kept it a secret. How long has this been going on? How long? She yelled. You need to calm down, Miriam, his colleague, said. She glared at the woman, glared at all of them. How stupid she had been to expect loyalty for them. She had catered for Miriam's birthday just last year. She had been with Hakeem in the hospital a few months ago when he had kidney surgery. She had been there for everyone, but in her moment of tribulation, they took sides with her husband, abandoning her. Don't freaking tell me to calm down! How long has this been going on? She yelled. About 2 years, Bruce said. We were having issues, and she walked away from him and every one of them. For 2 years, he had been unfaithful. He had kept all of this a secret for 2 years, and he had been aided by those she considered family. Zoe had no idea how she got home. Immediately after getting home, she settled on a couch and searched through the contacts on her phone. It had been years since she last spoke to Dan, but what she knew to this day was that he was a good divorce lawyer, and with her whole life falling apart, she needed him. It was a tense meeting a couple of weeks later when Zoe met with Bruce and his lawyers. She had almost not made the meeting. She had stared at herself in the mirror, staring at herself in fear. She had been unwilling to let go of Bruce for a while, but now was the time. He had moved on, and so would she. It's going to be okay, Dan, her lawyer, assured her. They had been in constant communication since she reached out to him. He was excited to reunite with her and had been very pissed to listen to her tell him about what was happening. He promised to take Bruce to the cleaners, ensuring he paid for what he did. Bruce glared at her as they walked into the room. Dan had been going back and forth with Bruce's lawyer, giving her updates on what was happening. At first, she was afraid of what Dan was asking for, the house and half of his net worth. It seemed ridiculous, but Dan assured her that things would be in their favor. If we don't reach an agreement, we will be going to trial, Dan said. She was worried about this, but Dan also assured her. I didn't think you were a gold digger, Bruce spat out. Dan flared up. Zoe held him back, sensing his anger. She stared at her husband. How much she had loved him, wasting 15 years of her life. I forgive you, Zoe said. It was easy saying those words. Months ago, she hated him passionately, but she had grown in these past months. She had started working out at the gym, reunited with her old friends, and even started working on the plan for a catering and event planning business. So, are you ready to give me what I want? Zoe asked. Dan scribbled his signature on the document, and Zoe smiled. She had a long way to go, but she would not give up on loving herself. The blessing of life is good health, but when you don't get it all, you just have to be grateful. Joel, the CEO of a billion-dollar company, was battling a terminal disease. Well, my days are numbered. I must leave well. He continued to be the kind-hearted man he has always been. Good people don't live long. He lamented to motivate himself while lying on his sickbed, trying to be strong. A maid came into the well-arranged standard room to care for her boss as she was paid. Thank you for all you have done, Tina. You are a nice man, sir, so I tend to put my best into taking care of you. Moreover, it's what I'm paid to do, she said with a friendly smile as she headed out of the room, driving Joel back into his thought. He has not seen his wife in days now, and she is comfortable with it. Another idea came through as he concluded she might be busy. He was busy with his belief that he didn't notice Tina was back to the room with his food to feed him. He rose when he was finally revived, and he took the food as he chatted comfortably with her, complimenting her beauty and appreciating her. She took the compliments and cleaned him up after feeding him, laying him down as he had lost almost all his organs to cancer. The sickness started 4 years earlier when he felt uneasy, and he went to visit his doctor, who conducted a test on him and broke the news. Joel was shocked, because he was conscious of his health and never believed he could ever be in that condition. He has tried everything he could so that he would survive, but there has been no cure for the illness. His money kept him for this long until the doctor predicted he had 6 months to live. He has, from that time, been depressed and tried so hard to live the best of his life as if that was not enough. Now he could no longer walk for himself anymore, and just a few weeks back, he was almost gone until he was revived by the scream of his maid, who was already crying profusely. He thought about all his life. He was a very hard-working man, trying all his best to succeed, which he did, but not after facing a lot of challenges on his way up. He felt he was just so unlucky because he had hoped to live long enough, and maybe by then his wealth would be noticeable in the world. He looked around and wept silently. Life is so unfair, he commented, talking to nobody in particular. Tina has been his only companion since everything started. His wife has not been there to care for him. She seemed so much more interested in his properties than taking care of the property owner. It annoyed him sometimes, but he has learned to calm his nerves as nothing lasts forever, and he does not even love an exception here. There was something about Tina that had always attracted him to her. He was unsure, but as much as he knew, Tina was a lovely, kind, caring, and intelligent young lady. She is still young and has a lot of potential. He just couldn't place it well as he occasionally thought about her. She was the only person that went out of her way just to see him smile. The wife, on the other hand, Miss Catherine, is a fashion freak. She loved expensive and flashy things ahead and had a high taste for everything. She took over her husband's company ever since he became sick. She has since then changed a lot. She didn't have a child of her own and was never a supporter of adoption. She believed she was living her best life, as advised by her friends. When she first heard about her husband's illness, she spent lavishly and had young boys for her sexual satisfaction. She has failed to bring in more projects for the company's development. Joel knew he was not the best. He could leave the company, but he had no choice as she was his wife. He hoped for a miracle, though. Joel laughed at his wrecked conclusion as he struggled to turn to the other side of the bed. He rang the bell to summon Tina, who was always at his service. He just decided he would ask about her family for the first time. He just wanted the day to end well. He sighed softly. She came in almost immediately with her angelic smile as always. They began their conversation, and the name Jessica was constant during the conversation. That was Tina's mom. Tina explains her situation worsened due to her father not being responsible, and she doesn't even want to know him due to the hardship and struggles he has made her and her mom go through. Joel tried hard to remember why that name sounded so familiar until he realized where that was coming from. Jessica was Joel's lover at the university. Everybody had always considered them the best couple on campus until she became pregnant for him and he told her to go for an abortion, or that would be the end of their good relationship, as he didn't want any child at the moment because of his education. Jessica had to drop out of school because her parents were such a disappointer and decided she would not continue her education. He had not seen her since then, and he believed something terrible must have happened to her as she had not heard from her after his university days. He thought that he had always believed that something was different about Tina, but he never knew it could turn out to be like this. He regretted his actions. How mysterious could karma catch up with someone in the least expected way? He couldn't help but cry, and when he finally got to say something, he could only tell Tina he was sorry. She was surprised, as she didn't know why her boss was so moved by her story. It would be so wrong of him to try and hide the truth from her now, since he was going to be gone soon. He summoned all courage and looked Tina in the eyes from his dying bed and broke the shocking news to her. "Tina, I might be your father. Your story makes me remember my youthful days. I think I know your mother, and I think you might be my daughter." She was shocked that she had almost lost her stance. She looked at Joel in disbelief as tears ran down her cheeks. She had vowed to curse the man who abandoned her mom and made her live a miserable life, unknown to her that she had been taking care of him with sincerity and love. The atmosphere was filled with negativity. She could comprehend the situation. She stormed out of the room with just one statement running through her mind. "This cannot be true." To clear his doubts, Joel summoned his doctor for a DNA test. He begged Tina to surrender herself for a medical examination, and the result was out after some days. To his relief, the result had it that Tina was his daughter. Joel was the happiest man on the planet Earth. This meant a whole lot to him. He was not going to die barren. All this while, his wife was away from him. She didn't even care to know how good or bad his situation had grown. She was waiting for him to die so she could legally take charge of the company. She had always imagined being the next CEO of real estate. She didn't get the news of Joel getting back his daughter, as it was something he never spoke to her about when she came back home. She sipped her wine as she surfed through her e-commerce market, trying to purchase an expensive watch for one of her lovers. Clinton is Joel's legal advisor and also a perfect friend. They have been together for a while, and the relationship has been enjoyable. Joel informed Clinton about the new development as regards the order of his will. Getting a call like this from his client was surprising, and he felt he should see things himself. He went over to Joel's beautiful mansion. After a series of questioning and comprehensive looks into the situation, Clint did not doubt that Joel's mind was made up and would respect his decision. He gave Tina this lucky girl look as he was equally happy for her. Joel changed his will. In the new will, he willed all Joel's possessions to his only child, as Joel had ordered. Joel believed so much in Tina. He trusted her to handle everything well and make the family name great. He thought she had a lot of hidden potential, even though she had only served as his maid. The news soon traveled fast, as Dr. Smith, who was also a friend to Miss Catherine, who always helped her to conduct a series of abortions, was the one who led the DNA test. Dr. Smith made a copy of the DNA result and sent it to Miss Catherine. When she got the result and discovered her husband had a child, she flew up, and her eyes widened in disbelief as she picked up her purse and phone. She was not going to take this. How could he not tell her about this after all these years together? She shook her head, opened the door to her car, and immediately sped off home. Joel's last days were filled with joy, as he had already asked his daughter for forgiveness, and she was assured he had forgiven him. She didn't stop caring for him as she was fond of him from the beginning. Miss Catherine rushed into the house and straight into her husband's room. She dashed in and saw Joel and the maid smiling and talking happily. She could not take it as she poured out her mind bitterly. She was so angry that she mistakenly hit Joel in the chest. Joel developed convulsions almost immediately and was rushed to the hospital by Tina and Miss Catherine. The doctors did their best to revive him, and he was again so lucky to cheat death. However, he was still conscious. Miss Catherine was busy outside, threatening to deal with Tina. After a long wait, Joel was finally stabilized and allowed to talk to his wife and Tina. Joel was so sure his days were almost over. He held Tina's hands and whispered something into her ear. Afterwards, his pulse went flat. Miss Catherine left the ward silently as she cried softly. Tina could not have it. She also wept profusely as the nurses escorted her out of the room. Months after the tragic death of Joel, Miss Catherine instructed Tina to stay away from her as she was never going to recognize her as relevant in the family. She has also taken full ownership of the company. When the time was right, Clinton called on both sides and dropped the bomb. As if that was not enough, Joel gave all his houses to Tina, and Miss Catherine was left with nothing. Miss Catherine was not only disappointed, but bewildered. She threatened to sue Clinton and take the matter to court, as she believed that she could not be the will her husband left. She got into her car and zoomed off at the highest speed possible, looking for a spot to cool off her head. She was lost in the reality that she didn't notice the truck in front of her. She hit the car and became unconscious immediately. The accident claimed her legs. She also became mentally unstable from the hit on the steering wheel. Tina has been doing her best to prepare for the first day in the office. She knew it would not be easy, but she knew she had all it took to take a company to a higher position. She looked back at everything that had happened in a few months and believed she was the luckiest person on earth, as anybody would believe. She realized patience is a virtue, and being kind was its best compliment. Imagine she wasn't kind to Joel. They might never have had that conversation. Patience is not the ability to wait, but how one acts while waiting. It's good to be good, she said as she stepped out of her car and headed towards the company door majestically with a bright smile. The bang at the door pulled Chris from his nap. He rolled in bed for a moment, wondering what was happening. The noise intensified, and he limped out of bed. His dog Annie wagged her tail as she followed him to the front door. Outside were cops. He recognized one of them as Sheriff Nolan and the other as his deputy, Daryl. They had their eyes on him ever since he returned to town. "Put your hands where we can see them, Chris," Sheriff Nolan barked. "What's going on?" Chris asked, confused. "Do as he says," Daryl said, pointing his gun at him. Chris lifted his hands, and as he did, the deputy pushed him against the wall. He struggled, and a gun was placed against his back. The sheriff went into the building with another officer right behind him. Chris noticed the crowd that was slowly beginning to form. His neighbors across the street were watching the debacle with their phones out. His head lowered in embarrassment. He had done nothing wrong. He didn't even know what was happening to warrant the cops coming over to his house and treating him this way. He heard noise from within the house as the cops ransacked his home. Annie barked and they yelled at her to shut up. Poor Annie. She was a dog he rescued, whose former owner had been violent. She had to be very scared. The officers returned. The sheriff held up a bagged pistol that made the crowd gasp. "You're under arrest, Chris Jacobs, for the robbery and assault of Scott Brown," the sheriff said, just as the cold cuffs clamped around his wrists. Chris struggled, voicing his innocence as he was taken to the police cruiser. Cameras flashed in his face, and he was shoved into the back seat of the car, his head lowered, and he burst into tears. He had done nothing wrong, but why would they believe him? The town of Burke had a pretty decent-sized police station. It used to be smaller, but as the population grew, so did the crime rate and expansion. However, budget cuts affected the maintenance of the building, and Chris sat in a freezing dark interrogation room. He had been left here for more than 3 hours, going by the wristwatch. He had called out several times, but no one answered him. This was not fair, but nothing had been suitable since he got out of prison. The world treated him like a vermin because of a mistake he made 10 years ago. He had returned home to Burke, another mistake he had made, and the people made it obvious they didn't want him around. They crossed to the other side of the road when they saw him. They walked past him with their noses lifted and hands clutching their bags. They grabbed their children like he ate kids for breakfast whenever little kids strayed to him with curiosity. The first week he had moved back, there had been some sort of petition to get him kicked out of Burke, but the council votes had failed, and he was considered free to remain in Burke as long as he was of good behavior. Yet he had been treated as a threat for 3 months since he returned. The people he once considered friends treated him like they didn't know him, cutting ties with him. The door opened with a creak. The sheriff had with him a half-eaten donut which he munched hungrily. "I need a lawyer," Chris said, the first thing that came to mind. A lawyer hadn't saved him 10 years ago from going to prison, but still, he needed one. "You are scum," the sheriff spat with hate. "Piece of shit. You're going back to prison, and you ain't coming back from it." He was enjoying this. The sheriff had always hated Chris, and with good reason. "You should never have come back here," the sheriff said. There was a sound at the door. The deputy joined in, who gulped down a bottle of soda. "You confess yet, boss?" Darrell asked. "I did not—" "Shut up!" The sheriff hit the table, making Chris jump. "You robbed old Mr. Brown, who has always been kind to everyone in town." The sheriff was right. Mr. Brown was one of the few who didn't treat Chris like he was the Antichrist. The man even gave him a job mowing his lawn and invited him for dinner. Chris shook his head in denial, afraid of what the sheriff would do if he said a word. "You went to his house with the pistol, hit him on the head, and stole all his savings. I always knew you were an asshole, but to go this low, you are a monster, a disgrace." Tears pooled in Chris's eyes at the words. How many times had he heard those words from people? From his mother when she had come to him for the first time, and the last time when he was in prison. From his then-fiancée, who had told him she could not wait for him and needed to move on with her life. "I didn't do anything," Chris said. He would never hurt Mr. Brown. Never. He had never deliberately hurt anyone. "Then explain what the pistol was doing in your house," Darrell asked. The sheriff shot him a look, and he kept quiet. "It belonged to my father," Chris simply explained. He had done some spring cleaning a couple months ago and found it. He should have listened to his intuition and gotten rid of it, but he had kept it for sentimental reasons. "You're drunk of a father." "Like father, like son," the sheriff laughed. His dead father had been one of Burke's most minor favorite citizens. He had been a drunk and couldn't hold on to a job for more than a month. As a young boy, Chris had promised himself that he would not end up like his father. Unfortunately, he had beaten his father's record of not going to prison. "I am—" Chris yelped in pain as the sheriff grabbed him by the neck. He was a burly man who used to be a boxer. His eyes boggled as the sheriff's hold on him intensified. "Your life is over as you know it. You are not coming back from this." "Boss, I think he's dying." Darrell's voice drifted to him. The sheriff let go of Chris, who gasped frantically for air. He had felt at that moment that he was dying, and he had been ready to give up. The life he was living was no life. It was one filled with regrets and torment, one he was tired of. "I would like to speak to my client." They turned around at a voice. For the first time, Chris was relieved. His cousin, Ashley, was a lawyer and lived in Burke. "Your cousin is not getting away with this like last time," the sheriff sneered. "You have no evidence against him, do you?" Ashley asked. "He was seen leaving Mr. Brown's house last night," the sheriff said. "I had dinner with him," Chris defended. "After which you knocked him over and stole from him," the sheriff said. "Mr. Brown is in the operating room. When he comes out, he will tell us the truth. Until then, you can't keep him," Ashley said. The sheriff glared at both of them with hatred. He had hated them since that fateful night that a drunk Chris had been the one driving in an accident that had taken the life of his only brother. An accident that had made Chris go away to prison for manslaughter, but got out on good behavior a couple months ago. They rode back home quietly. Chris was heavy with thoughts and worry for Mr. Brown. He hoped he was going to recover from the attack. He was a kind man who didn't deserve to be attacked and stolen from. "Did you do it?" his cousin asked when they arrived at the house. His head lowered in disappointment. Of all people, she would know him better. Most of his family had given up on him. He would be out on the streets if he had inherited the house from his mother. "No, I did not," Chris said. She didn't believe him. He could tell the way she looked at him. "Don't leave town and stay at home. All eyes are on you right now," Ashley said. Annie ran to him when he opened the door. He hugged her. She was his only friend and probably the only one who believed in him. The house was a mess. It seemed like a storm had passed through. They must have returned and continued looking for something to implicate him. He moved past the chaos and set up a place to rest his head. He closed his eyes but was unable to sleep. Sleep was far away from him. He had a feeling his situation was going to get worse. He was right. The following morning, Chris was rearrested on charges of murder. Mr. Brown had died overnight, and a neighbor had given a statement that she saw him leave after a scream came from the house. He had been kept in the interrogation room for more than half a day without food or drink. He had asked for his lawyer, but the sheriff ignored him, taking his fingerprints and making snide remarks about him. The sheriff came in. He was pretty happy to see him go down. He had never forgiven him for being the driver in that car 10 years ago. Driving drunk was the worst mistake of Chris's life. He had been young and stupid, ending with him losing his best friend and spending years in prison. He had paid his dues, but to everyone else, he was still the monster who had cut short the life of Burke's sweetheart and the mayor's son. "Karma's a bitch. It's over for you, Chris. I am so glad I am alive to see you fall. They are going to give you the electric chair. I will make sure of it," the sheriff sneered. "Please, Nolan, believe me, I didn't do—" Chris groaned in pain as he saw stars, with the sheriff's fists running into him. He doubled over as another punch hit him in the stomach. Soon he was on his knees as blows rammed into him, filled with anger and hate for him. "Your life is over. Fucking over," the sheriff said. "Sheriff, you're going to kill him," Daryl said, pulling him off Chris. "He deserves to die. He's nothing but trouble." The sheriff spat as Chris reeled in pain. "He didn't do it, Sheriff," Daryl said. "He fucking did it. We got a confession. Tom and Blake's picked up a guy hitching out of town. He got blood over him and some of Mr. Brown's jewelry. He was high on drugs and confessed to killing him. He's got a history, Sheriff. He's the one, not Chris," Daryl said excitedly. The sheriff pulled away from Chris, staring at him in surprise and then disappointment. "I told you I didn't do it," Chris whispered as a cloak of relief descended upon him. With all fingers pointed at him and a criminal record, it would have been easy for him to be sentenced for a crime he didn't commit. As he headed out of the building a couple of minutes later, wincing from the bruises, he decided he would no longer be a coward and allow people to treat him with disdain and disrespect. He had gotten a new opportunity in life, and he was going to grab it by the reins and make the most of life. Cordelia's following words were cut short by the slap that resonated across her face. Tears sprung in her eyes, and she bit her lips. "You incompetent fool!" a tall woman with fiery hair hissed as she grabbed Cordelia's shoulders. She shook her, and Cordelia's hands dangled at her sides. "Why did you have to bring your smelly self in here when I was in a meeting with an important client? Who gave you the audacity?" The woman let go of Cordelia and flung her to the floor. Cordelia gasped at the pain that shot through her lower leg. She crouched on the floor, trying to hide the tears rolling down her cheeks. I didn't know, a voice in her head kept saying. It was a voice she could not let out, no matter how hard she tried to speak. The boss stalked towards her, and still seated, Cordelia backed away, her skirt scraping the floor. "Tina, why don't you calm down? It's not like her coming into the meeting made a negative impact," Sure, it was awkward at first, but we got the contract signed. A man in the corner of the office said from his armchair. Oh, would you shut your trap, Tony? What do you know? Tina turned to Cordelia again and pulled her up from the ground by her hair. Cordelia's scream rent the air. Shut it! You are fired, got it? Get out of my office and don't you dare return. I don't want to see your slimy and ugly face again, you fool. Please, Cordelia stuttered, tears rolling down her cheeks. Tina's reply to her appeal was another slap across the cheek. How dare you talk to me? Get out of here! Tina shoved the sobbing Cordelia out of her office. Leaning against the outside wall, Cordelia heard her mutter, Good riddance. Sobbing quietly, Cordelia made for walking away. She winced and fell to the floor. Her hand rubbed her ankle, and her tears fell. Jobless and injured, those were the only thoughts in her head. Oh, look who we have here. It's the big crying baby. Did Tina let you go? Someone asked, causing Cordelia to raise her head. Her eyes flashed with pain. She was the one that had caused this situation. How could she laugh at her? How could you? Cordelia stuttered through her tears. Whenever she was emotionally stressed, it was unfortunate that she stuttered. Oh, shut up. Do you honestly think you are befitting to be Tina's assistant? I mean, you were so dumb to fall for my lie. I told you she needed you, and you instantly went to her office. A fool like you deserve nothing good. Cordelia's colleague, Kelly, said as she flipped her hair. Do you mind position? Cordelia cried. Oh, don't be a naive fool. Do you think I did this because I covet your position? I fooled you because I simply cannot stand you. Enjoy your jobless life, you idiot. Kelly kicked Cordelia's hurt ankle as she shoved past her, and Cordelia cried. She managed to take in deep breaths after a few minutes, and she stood up. It did not take Cordelia long to pack her few belongings into a box. She sobbed harder as she held her favorite mug, her last present from her mother before she died. It's going to be fine, she whispered as she limped out of the building. Cordelia spared one last look at the building before she started down the sidewalk. Someone pushed her, and the box fell in her hands. Watch where you're going, bitch! The person shouted. Cordelia gasped and fell to her knees. She pulled out the broken shards of her favorite mug, and her lips trembled from unshed tears. Why, she whispered. Why? Are you coming or what? A voice called to Cordelia after what seemed like hours to her. The bus heading to her part of the city was in front of her. The driver, a friendly man called Pete, was waving. She scrambled to her feet and winced. Bedraggled, Cordelia made her way into the bus. Her sadness blinded her as she did not see the person waving at her until a hand grabbed her. Please don't hurt me, she cried, her eyes shut. Cordelia? What happened to you? A familiar voice asked. Cordelia's eyes flew open, and she saw her only friend in the world, Bree. They had followed the same bus circuit for a long time and had become close. Hi, Bree, she whispered. I can't believe all that happened to you in one day. Indeed, when it rains, it pours. So what will you do now? You needed that job, Bree told Cordelia minutes after sharing her story. Cordelia's head fell. I guess we will have to survive on Kyle's salary until I get another job. I'm sure Kyle will understand. He will. Bree rolled her eyes. That guy mistreated you when you were jobless, and when you got a job, he will never let you keep a dime. What makes you think he'll be understanding this time? Because he loves me, Bree. He does, Cordelia said softly. You are so naive, Cordelia. A man who loves you will not treat you like shit. I have told you several times to leave him. You've been facing bullying at that job for so long, and even when you returned home with scars, he never inquired why. Is that a man that loves you? Everyone can see he does not love you. You are the only one who thinks he does. He loves me, Cordelia whispered. Bree shook her head. My daily dose of advice is over. Take care of yourself, Cordelia. Thanks, Bree, Cordelia muttered. We will go have some coffee and cake, my treat. I won't let you go home feeling blue. Thanks, Bree. Cordelia smiled a little. Alongside Bree, Cordelia trudged to the apartment building where she lived. Across the street, she saw an older woman pushing a cart. Don't do it, Cordelia. Come on. Money was tight before, and it's going to be super tight from now on. Bree hissed under her breath. I have to help. She is in a worse situation than me. I have to, Cordelia told her friend as she hurried to the homeless woman. She returned with a smile and Bree grabbed her arm. How much did you give her? Cordelia stuttered. 20. Oh, for crying out loud! You are too kind and helpful for your own good, Cordelia. Struggling people like you and I cannot afford to be all giving and kind. How many times do I have to tell you that? I don't have to be swimming in money to help those who need my help, Bree. Cordelia smiled at her friend. Bree sighed and shook her head. I can only hope that your kind heart will help you, but then I think of the fact that you are still with Kyle, and I doubt it will. It is that kindness of yours he is taking advantage of. Bye, Bree. Cordelia waved at her friend and hurried into the old building. The moment she entered her apartment, Cordelia knew that something was wrong, but she could hear muffled sounds from the bedroom. Slowly, she followed them. She gasped when she saw clothes strewn at the entrance of the door. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door. Kyle? She stammered as tears fell. Entangled in bed with Kyle was Kelly, the woman who had gotten her fired just hours ago. How could you? Cordelia cried. Kyle shrugged and kissed Kelly, who unashamedly lay back in bed. It was about time you found out. You're worthless, Cordelia. I can't keep wasting my time with you. We are done. I deserve better. But I love you, Cordelia wailed. Whatever. He does not love you back. Please leave already. Honey, are the divorce paper readies yet? Oh, yeah. Cordelia, you'll find them on the table in the kitchen. Kyle waved her away. But, Cordelia cried. Kelly groaned and jumped from the bed. She threw a robe and rushed at Cordelia, shoving her to the floor. Get out of here, you dirty pig! Cordelia fell and hit her head on the floor. She groaned and curled into a ball as pain shot through her head and stomach. Oh, just great. This nuisance is bleeding, were the last words she heard before she drifted away. It was her husband's voice. Cordelia woke up in the hospital a week later to find the divorce papers beside her bed. I am sorry, you lost your baby. You were 6 weeks pregnant and, The doctor said that Cordelia had already covered her head while crying silently. She had lost her husband and a baby she had not known she was carrying. She had been longing for a kid for so long. All she wanted to do at that moment was die. Bree had been right. Kyle had done nothing but hurt her. She had been too naive and had let herself be fooled. It's going to be fine, Cordelia. It will be. Bree patted her shoulder. It won't be okay, Cordelia cried. I never catch a break. Just when I get a glimpse of happiness, sadness abounds. Cordelia wailed louder, and all her friend could do was hug her. Hey, stop being a slowpoke and clean that up already, the beefy man hissed at Cordelia. She nodded and shoved the mop faster. As soon as he left, she wiped the sweat off her brow and sighed. She looked around her. It had been 2 months since she started working as a janitor in the office building. Life there was not significantly different from the life she had experienced before. Still, she needed the money. She could do nothing. The insults, the shoves, the assault, she was not strong enough to fight back. Hey, stupid, take out the trash! The beefy man, who was the office manager on the floor she was working on, hissed at her. Cordelia grabbed the garbage can and hurried out of the building. She froze in the alley beside the building where she saw an older man being accosted by 2 men working there. They had knives pointed at him. Cordelia turned around, but then stopped. She was trembling because she was afraid, but she shook her head. She had to help him. She pulled out her phone and quickly dialed 911. Please come now, she whispered. You fucking bitch! She felt the knife's sharpness as it pierced through her just as blood pooled at the front of her shirt. The sounds of sirens surrounded her as she fell into the darkness. You're up! Thank goodness! I'm glad you're okay. Cordelia blinked and tried to sit up. She winced, and a pair of strong arms held her down. You need to rest. Who are you? She asked the tall man with kind eyes who was standing beside her. You saved my life, miss. Thank you. Your friend Bree has told me everything you've been through. Despite it all, you stuck your neck out for me. No, it's okay. The stranger shook his head. I will help you, Cordelia. First, we are getting you a proper apartment, then a good job befitting a good person like you. You are now under my care, and you won't want or cry. It'll be okay. Thank you. Thank you, Cordelia sobbed as Bree hugged and the stranger patted her shoulder. It was Jerome's first day at his new school. He had moved over during the summer break and was looking forward to a fantastic school year. His parents had suffered a nasty divorce, and he had moved to New Orleans with his mother, who had sole custody. He had a lot of expectations for the new year. He was going to make many friends and stop being a nerd. Are you going to be okay? His mother asked as they pulled into the school driveway. For the 100th time, he nodded. McKinney High was more significant than his old school, but it was just a school, right? She kissed him goodbye, and he hurried out of the car without a wave. He rushed towards the trooping students headed into McKinney High. At 15, Jerome was tall and skinny with ginger hair. He was still undergoing puberty and had acne scattered all over his face. He had a tub of sunscreen in his bag and, under his mother's supervision, had put a decent amount on his face before they left the house. He stared around the hallway eagerly and in excitement. He had Googled a lot about his new school, which had twice the size of his old school student body. "Watch where you're going, punk," a chubby girl said, pushing him aside. "Sorry," Jerome quickly apologized as he held on to his school bag. He looked around for a smiling face, but it was the first day of school, and everyone was on and about. And then he spotted a smiling face, a tall guy just like him with ginger hair. How cool was that? Just as Jerome headed for him, something crazy happened. Two big dudes began to punch him. Everyone else ignored what was happening, making their way around the commotion. Jerome hurried over to him. "Hey, stop it!" He waved his lean hands. The two dudes let go of the guy. "Who the hell are you?" the bigger boys said. "You are hurting him," Jerome said, pointing at the boy with blood coming from his nose. "What is going on here?" a slender woman with a stern look asked. "We wonder the same thing, Miss Agatha. We found Jacob beating up this guy," the other guy said, pointing at Jerome. "Who, me?" Jerome said, stunned. "Is that right, Jacob?" Miss Agatha asked Jacob, who sat on the floor. The two bullies looked at Jacob. Jerome's eyes widened when Jacob nodded. "What? He didn't even know any of them. This was his first day in school." "That's not true. They were the ones beating him up," Jerome defended. A few minutes later, he found himself at the principal's office. The principal, Mr. Scott, was a busy man, as he told Jerome. He didn't like to waste his time on frivolous matters. He stared at Jerome disapprovingly. "I didn't do anything, I swear," Jerome defended himself. It was ridiculous that he would bully a kid on the first day. Who would even believe that? "Then who did it?" the principal asked, hands on his waist. "I told you who did it. The two boys did it. I am new here." "Why did you transfer schools? I am thinking about a bad record with violence, huh?" the principal asked with an intense stare. "Why I transferred here is none of your business," Jerome blurted out. He did not want pity from anyone when he told them they had moved here after his parents divorced. "Then I'm going to have to call your mother," the principal said. 20 minutes later, his mother showed up. She was not pleased to learn that her son had gotten into a fight on his first day of school. It was not even break time yet. "Ours is a school of discipline and integrity. If he's to stay here, he has to adhere to the rules of our beloved school," the principal said with a bored expression. "I assure you, Mr. Scott, he's going to behave. Right, Jerome?" his mother said with a stern look. "Right," Jerome said. He was late for his class, and it was just his luck that the door made a loud creak as he got in. All eyes were on him as he looked for an empty seat. He found one closest to him, but when he got there, someone had put a bag on it. He moved to another, and a bag was put on it, and so on. He found himself at the back of the class, which made him strain his eyes to see the board, despite his glasses on. Class ended, and Jerome stood up. At least he tried to, but the chair was glued to his trousers. He struggled to get up, but the class laughed at him. Tears welled in his eyes. It was his first day at school, and it was a tough one, from him being falsely accused to him being now glued to his chair. It wasn't even broken time yet. The week was slow for Jerome, filled with one problem. It seemed like everything was not going on in his favor. Pranks were being played on him in class, and the teachers ignored what was happening. Jackson and Peter, the bullies he had met on his first day, were the masterminds, and nobody did anything to confront them. While Jackson was the mayor's son, Peter's father was a judge, and they were deemed untouchable by the principal and teachers, who chose to turn a blind eye to their harassment of other students. "Don't worry, some new kid is going to come along, and they will ignore you," Jacob said. He had come to apologize to him after his first day. He knew if he hadn't lied, Jackson and Peter would bully him even more. Jerome had been bullied for most of the school year at his previous school. The divorce had worsened as his father had begun to date his principal. Moving here was supposed to be a new beginning, but the bullying had followed him. "Hey, Thread," Jackson said, pushing him against a locker. Jerome looked around. Every time Jackson bullied someone, it was like all the teachers and other students had disappeared. "What's in your bag today?" Jackson said, grabbing Jerome's bag. Peter emptied the bag and took Jerome's lunch and the money his mom had given him. "That's mine," Jerome said quietly. "What did you say?" Jackson asked as he pinched Jerome's cheek. The bullying continued for months, and Jerome reclined into a shell. He barely talked to anyone in school. He didn't speak to his mother at home. He was always afraid because of what Jackson and Peter did to him at school. There was no one to talk to because they would either not believe him or do anything about it. Jerome tried to keep it under the radar. He hid in the restroom during lunchtime. He hid until classes began before he got into class and hid behind in the class until everyone went home. The duo caught up with his escape plans and found a way to get through and bully him. One morning, a rumor went around the school that test questions had been stolen from the biology teacher's office. Mr. Donald had arrived at school early and found the test questions missing before the person could return them. The school board was investigating the theft. "Whoever committed this act will be expelled, I assure you. We will find you," the principal announced in assembly. The students filed back into the class as instructed. They were to remain in a class while an investigation took place. Jerome hurried to the bathroom stall to ease himself. It was when he was there that he'd heard two familiar voices. "They are going to find out we stole the test," Peter said with a shaky voice. "Shut up, stupid. They are not going to find out," Jackson said. But Peter was scared. "The janitor saw us in the hallway." Jackson scoffed. "He won't say a word. He knows my father will deal with him. Don't worry, I have it all sorted out. No one will believe we stole the results." Of course, they were the ones who stole the result, Jerome thought. He waited in the stall, contemplating if he should tell the principal what he knew, but decided not to. He could get into trouble if he told Mr. Scott. Besides, he didn't want Jackson and Peter to get into trouble. Yes, they bullied him, but he chose to see the good in them. His grandfather used to say, "Bullies are all tough and mighty, even on the outside, but on the inside they are just scared little kids who yearn for love." Even though they had been awful to him, he wasn't going to reveal their secret to anyone. During the second period, the principal and head of security came into the class. "Jerome, come with us," the principal said. "I don't know anything about the stolen tests," Jerome said. The principal and head of security said nothing as they led Jerome to his locker. Jerome gasped as they opened it. Inside was the stolen test results. "I knew you were trouble from the first day I set my eyes on you." "No, I didn't steal it," Jerome said in surprise. His defense fell on deaf ears. Even when he tried to tell the principal what he had heard, he refused to believe him. His mother picked him up. The ride back home was tranquil. She was disappointed in him. He was also disappointed in her for not believing him. He had never stolen. She knew him better than that. "You are grounded for 3 months," his mother said when they got home. He had been suspended while the school board held a disciplinary panel to decide on the appropriate punishment, but Jerome knew the result. He would be expelled. The principal had made it clear he had no future at McKinney High. The following day after his mother went to work, Jerome schemed. He was not going to be the fall guy for Jackson and Peter. They had not only bullied him, but they had also embarrassed him in front of his classmates. It was supposed to be a fun school year, but they had made it into a horrible year, with him about to be expelled. No one believed him, or instead they chose not to. It was up to him to prove his innocence. On Saturdays, Peter worked at an ice cream parlor owned by his uncle. Jerome stood by the counter, but had no intentions of ordering. "I know what you did," Jerome said. "I don't know what you're talking about," Peter said. "I know you and Jackson stole the biology test," Jerome said. "That's not true. You don't know what you're saying," Peter defended. "Says who? I have proof of it on my phone. I was in the restroom, and I heard the two of you talking." Jerome smiled as Peter's face went pale. "It wasn't my idea. It was Jackson. His father will send him to boarding school if he doesn't pass his exam. He was the one who stole the teacher's keys during lunchtime. I swear it wasn't me." Jerome had lied. He didn't have any proof on his phone, but with Peter giving Jackson away, Jerome recorded his confession on his phone. The following morning, while the disciplinary committee went on, Jerome appeared. "You are not supposed to be here," the principal snapped when he saw Jerome. "I'm here to exonerate myself," Jerome said before playing the recording. Peter was summoned before the committee, and with the evidence before him, he gave out his accomplice, Jackson, who had no other option but to confess. The following day, Jerome strolled into school with his shoulder held high and a confident smile. His classmates clapped on his back and hailed him for his actions. Jackson and Peter had been suspended, and the school board would no longer tolerate their bullying and bad behavior. Jerome knew he would have a fantastic school year from now on.